Good evening, friends. So thanks for having me for this meet. I thank the organizers for having me in this meet. So I'll be talking on this important topic, fungal infections in ICU. Can we control it? So the simple answer is yes, we can control it, but the whole effort has to be coming from the clinicians, administrators, and the organizations to control the fungal infections. Like any other stewardship that we do have stewardship for fungal infections also. So the topics that I would cover is the problem of fungal infections globally and the burden of fungal infections in India. And we need to understand what are the risk factors for the fungal infections in any patient that is in ICU. And is there an entity called antifungal stewardship, and how do we go about incorporating this antifungal stewardship? And now the whole emphasis is trying to improve the diagnosis of invasive candidiasis by adopting non-culture methodologies. So we have three studies to look at the effectiveness of these three methodologies. Then we'll talk briefly on the whole concept of empirical versus preemptive treatment of antifungal agents, because there is a lot of specialties which tend to overuse antifungal therapy, assuming that these patients are at a higher risk in an empiric fashion, which induces resistance and which increases the cost and may influence bad outcomes. So we will look whether there's any evidence at all for any empirical usage of antifungal. And we need to talk about the metrics. So when I say all the hard work has to come from a clinician, so there's a lot of audits that one needs to do within the organization with the help of administrators to look into the metrics as to how we are performing with our stewardship with antifungals. And is there any evidence for this anti-stewardship or this antifungal stewardship, and take home message. So very quickly, we look into the burden of candidemia. So the fungal infections, when I'm talking predominantly, it will be with reference to candidemia because that is the predominant fungal infections, followed by aspergillus. So this candidemia can occur in immune competent and immune suppressed, and we look into epidemiology and risk factors very quickly. And invasive pulmonary aspergillosis constitutes the second most commonest fungal infections at 10 to 20%. And if you look, take the whole fungal infections into one basket, 70 to 90% are with candida and 10 to 20% are with invasive mycosis. So candidemia simply means presence of candida in the blood, and we do not treat them in a timely way, the mortality can increase from 23 to 57%. And the various global reports and all the studies put the sort of ballpark figure at around 40% as the mortality. So this is another study from US which is put at 34%. And if someone is not recognized to have fungal infections and remains untreated, the mortality can go up to 63%. So the key entity is to identify and pick up these infections, and it accounts to 5 to 15% of healthcare associated infections. And as I said, candidemia or the fungal infections constitutes fourth commonest cause of nosocomial infections. So when you look at this data from Belgium by Vincent et al., so this is a global data which has looked at the occurrence rate or the prevalence rate of candidemia. If you see globally, it hovers around 11 to 17%. So 17% was the overall candidemia, 15.7% was in Asia. And if you look at the aspergillus, it is 1 to 1.4%. And when you take all the infections, 62% were constituted by gram negative, followed by 47% were gram positive, and 19% were fungi. So this is the global burden of fungi. So it would sit somewhere between 15 to 17% as a ballpark you could keep in mind. So this was a landmark study called the EPIC-2 study, which came in 2011. So this was a big study done in 1,265 ICUs, 76 countries, where they evaluated 14,414 patients in ICU. So this is an intensive care unit study where they found 99 candidemias, out of which 69 were candida, 99 fungal infection, and 38 were combined, putting the prevalence rate of 6.9 per 1,000 patients in intensive care as a burden of fungal infections. And when you look at the mortality, as I said, mortality hovers between 23 to 60%. In this EPIC study, the ICU mortality was at 42.6% and hospital mortality was at 42.6. And if you see, the length of stay significantly is prolonged in patients with candida infections at 33 days, and hospital length of stay is 39 days, which means the patients who are in ICU for a much longer time possibly are at a risk of fungal infections, or patients with fungal infections tend to remain in ICU for a much longer time. And if you look at the sort of a data, this is from 49 US hospitals. Again, here it reflects that it's the fourth commonest cause of infections, and the mortality, as you see, sits around 40%. So for all the listeners, keep the mortality between 23 to 60%. 60% in untreated, and the average mortality across the globe sits around 40%. So this is the Indian data from various premier hospitals. So candidemia, as you see in Gangaram at 27%, predominantly in India, it is non-albicans. And these are the different species that are found in these hospitals. And we have a much sort of a robust data from AIMS, where Laboratories sat at 17.5. And if you look at mortality in India, it is much higher, 55 to 70%. So this again raises the question, something we need to improve upon in our survival rate or reduce the mortality in our Indian circumstances. This is the older data. Possibly these rates have come down because of the awareness and because of the knowledge transfer that has happened in this area. And we are seeing amphotericin B resistance also in Indian settings. So very quickly, we'll jump into the risk factors for fungal. So the very quick way of trying to ascertain the patients who are at a risk is looking at the Candida score. So it is very simply, I've just put it in a pictorial format for you to remember. Someone who's undergone surgery, someone who has a Candida colonization in more than 2 sites, or someone who's on TPN or who has a severe sepsis. So if you have more than 2.5 of any of these, so it is shown that the sensitivity is 81% and specificity is 74%. So this Candida score can sort of be used as a quick screening tool to identify patients who are possibly at a higher risk of Candida infection. But the more robust risk factors has come from this study from Kuzniak et al. So I'll just again put this in a pictorial format. So any patient in ICU would have a Ryle's tube, would have a CVC, and would have had an abdominal surgery, would be on proton pump inhibitor, or his Apache score would be much higher. He would be receiving antibiotics and would have underlying sepsis. So all these constitute important risk factors. The beauty of this article is they put odds ratio to each of these risk factors. If you see CVC catheter, so the fact that someone in ICU has a CVC catheter constitutes highest odds of them developing fungal infections or candidemia. The second is stress ulcer prophylaxis. So for all the listeners, we know there's no role for routine use of stress prophylaxis, stress ulcer prophylaxis in ICU. So we should possibly think about it and minimize the usage of stress ulcer in ICU, because the odds of developing candidemia is 6.4 when someone is on stress ulcer. And the fact someone in ICU itself constitutes a high risk of candidemia at 6.4. And someone who has an nasogastric tube, the odds is 3.7. And someone who gets indiscriminate usage of antibiotics, the odds of 1.5, which means to say this, if you just remember at the end of it, these 5 important risk factors that patients are exposed to in ICU, having a CVC catheter, having stress ulcer prophylaxis, nasogastric tube, and indiscriminate antibiotic, all these constitutes risk for patient developing candidemia. And someone with acute kidney injury has an additional risk. And the others are like laparotomy, anastomotic leak, all that we know intuitively that they are at a much higher risk of developing candidemia. So now we'll move very quickly into what do we understand by antifungal stewardship. So there are different components to this stewardship. So when someone is initiating antifungal injection, there has to be pre-authorization by a specialist, by preferably an ID specialist or a microbiologist, saying yes, this patient has fungal infection and you are approved to use these antifungal injections. And after initiating the treatment, this treatment has to be reviewed by the clinician and documented, and a feedback process has to be put in place whether effective usage of antifungal agents substantiated by the culture reports or by the PCR techniques or by any other methodology is confirmed. So that is very important. And there has to be antibiotic restriction policy within the hospital, which means anyone who just wants to start antifungal agents should not be dispensed antifungal agents like echinocandins, caspofungin, or fluconozoles without substantiating clinically that this patient has fungal infection. That is also very important. And de-escalation is an important aspect. I'm sure every listener here would know de-escalation seldom happens in antifungal. And even you could de-escalate to oral provided patient is achieved hemodynamic stability and blood cultures have become negative. And 3Ds is something very important even in antifungal, whether the right dosing of the antifungal agents has being used and whether the right duration is being used and whether these agents are de-escalated. And specific guidelines have to be put in place and they have to be in accordance with the global guidelines. And one has to put their energy and mind into rapid diagnostic techniques. And now there is renewed emphasis on therapeutic drug monitoring so that we are using effective doses of azoles or antifungal agents. So now coming to, so the whole concept of whether we can curtail the fungal infections depends on our ability to identify fungal infections very early on. So is blood culture good enough? I think the studies have shown that the sensitivity of blood culture to pick up fungal infection is only 50%, and the median duration to get an answer on blood culture is 2 to 3 days. And in fungal, friends, as you know, we need to know the speciation, and it takes another 2 days to get the species that the patient may be growing. So blood culture can be a delayed procedure to confirm and initiate treatment. Now there is emphasis on moving to MALDI techniques, MALDI-TOF, which is matrix assisted laser desorption ionization time of flight, and that's the pictorial representation as to how MALDI-TOF is done. And PCR techniques, we are adopting more of PCR techniques. It's much easier, hassle-free. And PNA is peptide nucleic acid fluorescent in situ hybridization. So that's a pictorial representation of how these tests look. So these are some of the tests which we need to adopt to try to pick up fungal infections much early on, treat them appropriately, and save more lives. Is there evidence for these three tests? So this is a study which came from, so this is one of the study which came from the US. So this, they have compared PNA fish and blood culture. So if you see, the candidemia was identified at 9.5 hours as opposed to blood culture, which took 44 hours, and that was statistically significant. And and caspofungin usage in these patients was less with PNA fish as opposed to blood culture. So 3.2 versus 8.7, and that was statistically significant. And this led to a significant reduction in the cost where these rapid diagnostics were utilized, where you could curtail the cost to the patient. And this was another study again from the US comparing PNA fish and blood culture. If you see again, the time to identify the fungus was only 0.2 days as compared to 4 days in blood cultures. And time to initiate the treatment was much quicker with these rapid diagnostics of 0.6 days as compared to 2.3 days in blood culture. So all in all, it basically tells you that you can identify fungi early, start the treatment early, and possibly improve the outcomes. This was another study by Guin et al. Again from US, where they have looked at 55 patients comparing PCR and beta-D-glucan and blood culture. If you see, sensitivity was much better with PCR and beta-D-glucan as compared to the blood culture of 17%. These were all statistically. So these three studies very conclusively tell us that possibly we should adopt rapid diagnostics to try and pick up fungal infections much early on rather than delaying. And there is a new test called T2 Candida panel, and this has the ability to identify fungal infections much early on. And there was one study where they identified 12 invasive fungal infections where the fungal infections were deep in situ sort of a focal fungal infections where blood cultures came out negative. So these are some of the advantages, and this is how the T2 Candida panel looks. Basically, it's a small point of care where you put in the serum sample and it gives you the report within 3 to 5 hours as opposed to the blood culture where it takes 1 to 5 days. So these are some of the advantages of rapid diagnostics. So what about MALDI, matrix assisted laser desorption ionization time of flight? So it only takes turnaround time is only 5 minutes for getting the answer on whether someone has fungal infections. And the trade name of this is Whitetech by Biomarine. And then we have PNA fish, which only takes 90 minutes turnaround to give an answer whether someone may have had a fungal infection. And this PNA fish has an ability to recognize all these other fungal infections like Candida, non-albicans, Parapsilosis, Tropicalis, Glabrata, and Cruzi. And PCR, which we are using and which is much easier, much more popular, it only takes turnaround time of 60 minutes. And BioFire was the earlier one. Now we have various other companies also which have come with multiplex PCR. Then we have this T2 Candida panel, which takes around 180 to 300 minutes, which I spoke about recently, which has ability to identify fungal infections much early on. And if you look at PCR, PCR has an ability to look at other bacteria also and look into other types of Candida species also. So that's about the rapid diagnostics and adoption of the rapid diagnostics to try and recognize Candida or fungal infections much early on. Now we'll move to antifungal therapy, which is a hugely sort of a exploited field where people use a lot of empiric antifungals in various specialties. We should dissuade that. So is there evidence for this? So we have good enough evidence to say we don't need to give empiric antifungals to improve outcomes, and we have to give only when there are indicators to suggest there is fungal infection. That is what we call as preemptive. Preemptive is where patient has variables suggesting that there is underlying fungal infections and you start the treatment. So this was a study by Cordener et al. In hematological malignancies. So these are patients with hematological problems. So let alone any other problem where they have not justified using empirical. So hematological malignancies on chemotherapy, autologous transplant, they did galactomannan twice per week. So they had 150 patients in empirical, 143 in preemptive. If you see, survival is no different. So which means to say there is no business to give empirical antifungals. And invasive fungal infections, where they were giving empirically, although there was no evidence, was only 2.7% as opposed to 9.1% in preemptive, which means to say the rest of it you would be giving inappropriately. And the duration of treatment was significantly less where preemptive treatment, which means you had variables to indicate that there is a fungal infection. So that the antifungal agents usage was significantly less, that was statistically significant. Most important, which is very relevant to our country, is the cost reduction. So if you see, because of having used this only in preemptive, you could reduce the cost by 1,475 euros as opposed to 2,252. So this was another study which came from Australia, Morrissey et al. They did in acute leukemia and patients who were undergoing allogenic transplant. They used galactomannan twice a week and they did PCR once per week. 122 in empirical and 118 in preemptive. And as you see, antifungal treatment, they used more indiscriminate antifungal therapy in empiric, which is understandable. And mortality, there was no difference. And the aspergillus was identified in 14% in preemptive as opposed to 0%. And hepatotoxicity and nephrotoxicity, there was no significant difference between these two. This is an important study which came from Germany, Hibart et al., where they did PCR techniques twice per week for 30 days and once per week up to 90 days after 30 days. So here 211 in empiric and 198 in preemptive. Invasive fungal infection, no difference. But look at the mortality. Mortality was high in the group which got empiric as opposed to preemptive. I think this is a very important sort of a signal that tells you that simply giving antifungal where there is no strong substantiation can increase the deaths. I think that comes from this study. So the message for the audience is don't use empiric unless you have a strong indicators or variables telling you that there is possible underlying infection. And survival, there was no difference. So that's about the evidence. So the message for the audience is don't use empiric unnecessarily. So you should try to de-emphasize on overwhelmingly using antifungals and try to restrict and adopt rapid diagnostics and justify yourself whether you are doing right things. So just will very quickly go into the metrics. Metrics is basically all the hard work that comes from the clinicians, ID teams, administrators, and the organization to monitor how the antifungal sort of a therapy is happening. So you have to look at defined daily doses per 1,000 patient days. Basically look at the consumption of the antifungal agents within the hospital, whether they are on an increasing trend, decreasing trend, or whether it is plateaued. And you have to look at the outcome. So after initiating antifungal agents, you have to audit and see how is the mortality of these patients? Is this being reduced? Look at the length of stay, look at the rate of candidemias that are happening within the ICU, and look at the recurrence of these fungal infections and the resistance patterns. And one needs to look at the outcome indicators, which is whether appropriate usage of antifungal agents are happening, whether the right dosing of antifungal injections are happening, and the initiation, whether it's happening at the early initiation and appropriate initiation, and the duration of antifungal. And there is good enough evidence to say all antifungal therapy can be de-escalated at 5 to 7 days, and there's no business to continue echinocandins if you have a fungal elements which are sensitive to azoles, and de-escalation can happen safely at the end of 5 to 7 days after patient has become hemodynamically stable and blood cultures have become negative. So there is really one needs to put energy into de-escalating high-end antifungal agents. And you have to look at the consumption. What is the average consumption of antifungal agents that are happening within the hospital, within ICU, and the average cost that that patients are incurring for this usage. And one needs to also look into the growing resistance pattern, because in India we have an emergence of Candida auris, which is resistant to echinocandins and azoles. So one needs to see whether there is Candida resistance, whether there are non-albicans which are showing resistance to azoles and other antifungal agents. And there is renewed emphasis on doing therapeutic drug monitoring. We have not started using this. This is something which possibly we should put our mind. We have to do therapeutic drug monitoring of azole levels to see whether adequate dosage is being given. And one needs to audit whether adequate source control is being practiced, whether the CVC lines are being removed in a timely way, because that is one of the quality marker in when you are treating fungal infections. And this is also something one needs to audit. So these are all the metrics, which means there is a value to it. and one needs to do this at least every two to 3 months in an organization. So there's a lot of manpower and resource utilization that has to be put in place to look into these metrics and see whether good fungal stewardship is happening within the organization. So last couple of slides. So evidence for antifungal stewardship. Now the question that automatically comes is, okay, we'll do all this, whether there is evidence that this will improve the care. So this was a French study in 636 patients, predominantly 72% Hemat-Onco patients for 6 years, where they used adopted antifungal stewardship with a good feedback for diagnosis, therapeutic drug monitoring, and treatment. Compliance was 88% achieved by incorporating the salient aspects of antifungal stewardship, and they found favorable outcomes was achieved in 75% of the patient with invasive aspergillosis and 87% of invasive candidiasis. And this was another study from UK in 173 patients where they used all this micafungin, voriconazole, but by adopting antifungal stewardship, they showed that half of the treatment was stopped or changed, and this led to savings of 180,000 pounds in their study. So this was a sort of a nationwide study where they showed good savings can be achieved at a national level by adopting antifungal stewardship. And this was by another study by UK where they showed de-escalation to fluconazole happened in 70.3%, which led to cost reduction. And this was another study from US where they showed effective de-escalation did not happen. See, they had 103 Candida species, 89 were susceptible to fluconazole, but de-escalation happened only in 39%. So these are all the signals that one could gain by doing antifungal stewardship. So the evidence is very much writing on the wall is there that there is good enough evidence by adopting antifungal stewardship that you could save lives and you could save money and you could possibly improve the care of the patient. So the take-home message, the candidemia is commonest fungal infection in ICU, fourth commonest nosocomial infection. It's increasing in frequency, increasing in resistance. And every listener here, just remember this picture. You need to have this picture in mind. So any patient in ICU will have all these aspects. They'll be on Ryle's tube, they'll be on CVC, they'll be having antibiotic usage, acute kidney injury, and stress ulcer prophylaxis. All these constitute important risk factors for Candida. And antifungal stewardship has shown, the evidence has shown it improves the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment. And the evidence is there for its benefit. But what are the right strategies to adopt? We need more work on that. And non-blood culture methods are here to stay, like PCR, MALDI, and PNA fish and T2 Candida signal hold good promise in trying to pick up these fungal infections much earlier and treat them in a timely way. And we need to have robust guidelines in place in every ICU for effective de-escalation to happen and to determine the right duration of therapy. So, and we need to have this interinstitutional collaborative network to share the data about the prevailing Candida infection and the resistance patterns that may be emerging. So thank you all. So I end with this beautiful quote. So we don't grow when things are easy, we grow when we face challenges. So thank you all.